Welcome back to the Beer Junkies. Today we are brewing one of my favorite styles of all time. We're doing the Märzen for our Oktoberfest celebration later on in September. The Märzen has a nice, deep, rich maltiness with toasty, bready notes and a nice balancing bitterness. It is a wonderful style that I recommend every home brewer brew at least once. So this recipe is going to be a little bit different from the one that I have done previously on this channel. I'm going to be changing the grain bill up a little bit. I'm also going to be fermenting it with high pressure lager yeast from White Labs. I'm going to be releasing a second part to this video going more in depth into the pressure fermentation and what it is and why we do it later on this week. But for now, I'll cover the basics of how I use it in this recipe when we get to those parts. So I'm going to walk you through the ingredients that we use, the grains, the hops, the water profile, and the yeast. Also going to walk you through our process, the mashing, mash out, the sparge, the boil, whirlpool, knockout, fermentation, and at the very the water profile for our Oktoberfest today is 50 parts per million of calcium, 15 parts per million of sodium, 75 parts per million of sulfate, and 65 parts per million of chloride. To do that, I'm adding calcium chloride, gypsum, Epsom salt, and a touch of baking soda and pickling lime. I do have some roasted malts in this grain bill that we're going to cover in just a second. So I want to add that pickling lime and baking soda as a buffer for the pH so it doesn't drop below that 5.4 mark. I will add the gypsum, Epsom salt, and calcium chloride to the mash tun and the sparge water to make sure I have a consistent water profile throughout the entire process. I don't need to add the baking soda and pickling lime to the sparge water because I don't want to make the pH go up for the sparge water. If anything, I want to make it go down a little bit so that I don't have the pH get too high during the sparge, which will increase our risk of extracting unwanted compounds that we mentioned in that mashing video. Right now, I have the hot liquor tank heating up and filling up to the right temperature and volume. So while that's getting ready, let's go over the grains we're going to be using. The starting gravity for this Oktoberfest is 1057, and to get there, I start with 38% of Vienna malt, 25% of Munich malt, and 25% of German Pilsner malt. These three together will help really build that malt richness that the Oktoberfest, the Märzen, is known for. Without going too overboard, I do also add 5% of a lighter crystal. I use crystal 60 Levibond for this recipe. That will help bump up the sweetness a touch, but it's not high enough that we'll get a caramel flavor, which is inappropriate in the Märzen style. I also add around 5% of melanoidin malt. Because I only do a single infusion mash, I don't do the traditional decoction mash. I wanted to bump up those melanoidins just a little bit. And then I finish off with 2% of a chocolate malt. It's mostly for color adjustment. There's not enough in there to really add a roasted flavor, which is also inappropriate. But it will add a touch of complexity, which I really do like in this Märzen style. The mash tun is ready, so let's mash in. We have our normal mashing setup, pulling wort from the bottom of the mash tun through the false bottom, pushing it through our wort pump, which is directed towards the Herms coil to maintain our mashing temperature. And I am recirculating, so as it recirculates through that grain bed filter, it will clarify that wort while maintaining that temperature. I mashed this Oktoberfest at 152 degrees Fahrenheit for about 60 minutes to get a nice mix of alpha and beta amylase for fermentability. After that 60-minute timer is up, I will raise that temperature to 168 degrees Fahrenheit for mash out. Our 60-minute timer is up, so now we are mashing out. I'm raising the temperature of the hot liquor tank up to about 174 degrees, which will raise our mash temperature up slowly to around 168. Once we get to 168 degrees, we will begin to sparge. We just got to a boil, so we will boil for 90 minutes. While this is going, let's go over the hops we're going to be using. The hopping for the Oktoberfest isn't too crazy. I recommend using any hop that has noble characteristics. I prefer using Mittelfrüh, but you can use any of the noble hops. If you can't have any of those, you can use a noble hop substitute like Liberty or Mount Hood. But regardless, I add around 13 IBUs worth at the 60-minute mark, and then I add around 7.5 IBUs worth at the 20-minute mark. That's all we need. We just need enough bitterness to counteract some of that sweetness. We just finished our boil, so now we are whirlpooling, pulling wort from the bottom of the boil kettle pushing it through our pump into the tangential input to create a vortex inside of the boil kettle, pulling all of the hops, proteins, and shrub to the center so we do not push them into the fermenter during knockout. I will whirlpool for 10 minutes and then let it wind down for 10 minutes. We just finished the whirlpool, so now we are knocking out, pulling wort from the bottom of the boil kettle, pushing it through our pump through the heat exchanger. We are injecting our oxygen down here. We're going through a little warm, just above 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'll cool that down. And then we're going all the way down here and pushing out all the excess air as we fill up that fermenter. As I mentioned earlier, we are fermenting this batch of the Märzen with the high pressure lager yeast from White Labs. Now, it will not be exactly the same as if we brewed it with a traditional lager strain, but it is very, very close, and most drinkers are not able to tell the difference between the two types of beers. Now, I will release a video later this week on pressure fermentation, what it is, how to do it, and what its benefits are. But for now, I will leave you with this. We are pitching the yeast at about 64, 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and then I'm immediately pressurizing it to about 15 pounds. I will then attach our spunding valve and also set it to 15 pounds of pressure. So any carbon dioxide that is produced above 15 pounds gets released, but we keep that pressure at 15 pounds throughout fermentation. I'll hold it here for about a week or until we are 4 specific gravity points away from our terminal gravity, which for this beer is 1020 with a terminal gravity of 1016. From here, I will let it free rise up to about 72 degrees Fahrenheit for that diacetyl rest. Now, it's not quite as important as most lagers because we are fermenting at a higher temperature, but I still like to do that diacetyl rest for good practice. After about 24 hours at this higher temperature, I will then cold crash it to 33 degrees Fahrenheit. I'll hold it there for between 24 to 48 hours. I'll then transfer it to our bright tank, carbonate it to about 2.5, 2.6 volumes of CO2, keg it, and then you can enjoy it right away, but I do like to let it lager until we are ready to tap it for our Oktoberfest celebrations in mid-September. All right, this is what we've got. It is crystal clear. It has a beautiful amber color with a nice lasting head. This took me about 3 weeks from the time we brewed it to the time that it was kegged. I won't put it on tap yet. I am going to put it in our cooler and let it lager until we tap it for our Oktoberfest celebration. But if you're in a pinch, you need to brew a quick Märzen style, I do recommend trying to use this high pressure lager yeast. For the smell, I get the maltiness. It's got some toasty notes coming through with a little bit of bread for the taste. Very similar. Got a deep maltiness, and then those toasty bready notes are coming through on the front. Got a nice smooth finish, and it's very clean. There are no noticeable esters. I'd have a very hard time telling you that this was not a traditionally lagered beer. I think there's just enough bitterness that balances it very nicely. We are over the age of 21. We do not condone underage drinking. Please drink responsibly. Cheers. If you would like to see more brewing content like this, make sure you click that subscribe button right below and let me know what you'd like to see next in the comments. Cheers.